Because of her surname Jiang, she was seen as a class enemy by the children, a lackey of the Jiang dynasty. The girl, Jiang Xiaolan, transferred schools many times for this reason, but was ostracized by classmates every time. Xiaolan often deliberately left school last, but would still be chased and cursed by classmates waiting outside. Sometimes Xiaolan couldn't help but ask her grandpa, "Why do they call me a counter-revolutionary lackey?" Her grandpa would always feign strictness. "Don't listen to their nonsense." At first, young Xiaolan couldn't understand her grandpa's helplessness and heartache. She naively fantasized that maybe if her parents were around, the other children wouldn't bully her. In that era, due to the down to the countryside movement, for young people, young Jiang Xiaolan and her grandpa relied on each other. Although her grandpa was over 50 and his movements were slow, his care for Xiaolan was still meticulous. Early on a winter morning, her grandpa would start busy with the stove, cooking, preparing hot water, squeezing toothpaste. Busy as he was, the grandpa wouldn't forget to put her warmed cotton jacket on Xiaolan the moment she woke up. And while Xiaolan ate her fragrant steamed bun, her grandpa would be busy braiding her hair. When everything was ready, her grandpa would personally walk Xiaolan to school. Outside the window, snow was falling heavily, the world cloaked in white. Before leaving, her grandpa would hand Xiaolan an oiled paper umbrella to shield her from the wind and snow. Xiaolan, stepping carefully in her grandpa's footprints in the snow, was full of childhood delight, full of childish fun. Unlike most doting grandpas, if Xiaolan misbehaved during the week, her grandpa would punish her with a ruler without mercy. But when faced with Xiaolan's clever tricks, her grandpa also had his own ways. Once, Xiaolan secretly hid her grandpa's wine flask lid. Her grandpa jokingly offered 5 cents to anyone who could find the lid. Xiaolan fell for the trick and had to obediently fetch the ruler for punishment. Xiaolan, without her parents' protection, would always crawl into the wardrobe to hide when she felt wronged. That airtight little space seemed to hold a magical power that could dissolve all her sorrow and grievances. Many times, Xiaolan would cry until she fell fast asleep. At these moments, her grandpa would secretly carry Xiaolan out of the wardrobe. Every time Xiaolan asked about her parents, her grandpa would become impatient. In her grandpa's version of the story, Xiaolan's parents were working on construction in Xinjiang and would return when the desert turned into fertile land. To make Xiaolan believe, her grandpa would often read her mother's letters to her. Xiaolan thus became full of yearning for Xinjiang. Whenever she missed her parents, she would sit by the Huai River watching the trains, constantly heading to the other shore, fantasizing that if she just boarded the train to Xinjiang, she could reunite with her parents. Such fantasies gave Xiaolan some comfort, but this comfort ultimately couldn't solve her immediate problems. Xiaolan became increasingly resistant to going to school. Once, she simply stood and wandered outside the school gate, hoping to skip school. When her neighbor, Xiao Kui, passed by, on an impulse, she took Xiaolan to the gym to visit her boyfriend. There, Xiaolan saw a gymnastics performance for the first time. She saw a group of girls gracefully spinning and elegantly leaping. A gap suddenly opened in Xiaolan's world, and the light pouring through it filled her with longing and hope, captivating her. One day, Xiaolan went to the dentist because she often secretly ate candy. On the clinic wall, she was deeply attracted by a gymnastics photo. It was the national gymnastics champion, Jiang Xiaoyi. She also had the surname Jiang, but she was shunned, while Jiang Xiaoyi was respected and loved by people. Xiaolan suddenly felt like she had found a lifeline. To escape the pain, she decided to learn gymnastics and become a champion. At first, her grandpa disagreed, but the news that neighbor Xiao Kui was also sent down changed his mind. Maybe if Xiaolan learned a skill, she wouldn't have to be sent down later. The grandpa quickly used his contacts to get the gymnastics coach to take Xiaolan. During the first lesson, Xiaolan cried out in pain when the coach forced her into the splits, and she cried out in pain. The grandpa watched from the side and played the Monkey King to cheer her up. The grandpa was heartbroken. As soon as they left the gym, he advised Xiaolan to quit gymnastics and try something else, but Xiaolan stubbornly insisted. She was determined to be a champion like Jiang Xiaoyi. Once she joined the gymnastics team, Xiaolan woke up before dawn every day to run. To help Xiaolan sleep well, her grandpa fanned her all night to chase away mosquitoes. During practice, her grandpa would sit on a stool, watching closely, afraid Xiaolan would have an accident. But even with her grandpa's company, Xiaolan was still excluded by the gymnastics team. She was ignored by the coach and mocked by the other team members. Xiaolan endured all the cold looks and could only practice quietly by herself. Time flew by. A long time has passed in a flash. Xiaolan finally grew into a graceful young woman. But one thing remained unchanged. She was still chased and cursed by her classmates. Xiaolan's longing for her parents grew stronger. She overheard her grandpa and neighbors talking about Commander-in-Chief Zhu Dai, who liked orchids, who would soon pass through their area. At that time, her grandpa would put his well-cared-for orchid at the station. Perhaps if Commander Zhu was pleased, Xiaolan's parents could come home earlier. Xiaolan took this to heart. She secretly used the malted milk given to her by her grandpa to water the orchid, hoping the flower would grow better and better. On the other side, Xiaolan's time on the gymnastics team was also becoming unsustainable. The official gymnasts had all received new leotards and gym shoes, but she hadn't. Once, when Xiaolan couldn't resist secretly trying on another team member's gym shoes, the coach's little young daughter saw her. When the daughter curiously asked her mother why Xiaolan didn't have a leotard, Xiaolan heard the coach's disdainful reply. "She's an amateur." Xiaolan's self-esteem was crushed, and she sat hugging her knees, distraught, for a long time. For the past few years, she could only teach herself during training. Several times she actively stood with the others, but was laughed and cursed away. If someone else wanted to use the same piece of sports equipment, Xiaolan was always the one who had to give way. Now Xiaolan was wounded again. When her grandpa heard what happened, despite the heavy rain, he took Xiaolan to the store to buy a new leotard. But leotards were uniformly issued by the state. No stores sold them. The grandpa had no choice but to choose the most similar style, and then went home to alter it. With the new leotard, Xiaolan regained her confidence. During practice, she once again bravely stood with the others to do a handstand. But when the coach corrected and guided, she deliberately walked past her. The gymnasts on her left and right also cursed her. "An amateur is an amateur, stop pretending." Even classmates from the academic classes purposely came to see Jiang Xiaolan embarrassed. Jiang Xiaolan still quietly endured it. Back in the classroom, she was drenched by a basin of cold water from her classmates' prank. The blackboard was still covered with insults directed at her. Xiaolan stepped forward to erase the words, then boldly wrote 3 characters. Jiang Xiaoyi. This was her only hope for a comeback. Actually, over the years, to deal with her classmates' attacks, Xiaolan had already learned to cope in her own way. So, Xiaolan climbed onto the rooftop, where she put on a one-person show of herself, winning the gymnastics championship and receiving the award, her moment of glory. The evening sunlight shone brightly behind her, but Xiaolan remained untouched by the brilliance, like a non-reflective surface, leaving herself in the dark. Her grandpa saw Xiaolan on the rooftop and sternly shouted for her to come down. He was afraid Xiaolan would fall and get hurt, and his voice was a bit harsh in his urgency. But this became the last straw for Xiaolan. For the first time, Xiaolan wept uncontrollably. "I can't be a champion at all. They're all official. I'm just an amateur. The coach teaches them, but not me. She ignores me. They all have leotards and gym shoes, but I don't. Everyone else has their parents around, but mine are not here." This time, the grandpa was also speechless. Food, clothes, toys, necessities, he could provide them all. But her parents' companionship was what he could never provide. That night, Xiaolan dreamt she was holding the oiled paper umbrella, like a magical sprite, drifting across the Huai River and boarding the northbound train. A group of children chased her desperately, but could never catch her. Xiaolan was encouraged by this. While her grandpa was sound asleep, she climbed onto a train. Unexpectedly, as soon as she was on, the train immediately started moving. Fortunately, her grandpa had worked on the railway when he was young, and quickly found the soot-covered Xiaolan through old contacts. Upon returning, Xiaolan proactively brought out the ruler. She knew she was wrong, and willingly accepted the punishment. But this time, her grandpa put down the ruler and instead took Xiaolan on a train ride and then returned to his job. Her grandpa also had many emotions. That evening, he took out his treasured medals and recalled the past. From the late Qing dynasty to the Republic of China era, he had received many medals, even driving a special train for General Li Zongren. Later, during the Japanese occupation, the grandpa went without food and money, refusing to drive for the Japanese. It was during that period that Xiaolan's grandmother, uncle, and other relatives died of tuberculosis. After Xiaolan's mother got married, her grandpa had been alone. Xiaolan's presence, for the old man, was actually a form of comfort. One day, her grandpa had a friend ship 2 harmy melons from Xinjiang. As her grandpa cut them at home, Xiaolan ran back and forth excitedly. She thought her parents had specifically sent them to her. She wanted to share this joy with all her neighbors. The very last piece the grandpa asked Xiaolan to give to the coach. If you take someone's favor, maybe the coach would teach Xiaolan well in the future. Xiaolan was extremely unwilling, but knowing she couldn't defy her grandpa, she had to leave with the basket. But when she reached the coach's door, Xiaolan again heard the coach's daughter call her an amateur. This term was like a heavy hammer that completely shattered Xiaolan's fragile self-esteem. Xiaolan turned and ran, fiercely eating the hammy melon meant for the coach all by herself under a tree. From then on, Xiaolan never went to the gym again. Life slowly went on. As Xiaolan grew more sensible, she became closer and more reliant on her grandpa. But this happiness was soon replaced by worry. This started with the neighbor Xiao Kui. Not long ago, Xiao Kui came home from the countryside to visit her family. She happily told Xiaolan that this was her last trip to the countryside. When she returned again, she would marry her boyfriend and have children. Seeing the sister she had been close to since childhood finally nearing happiness, Xiaolan also felt a sense of hope. But a few days later, bad news arrived. Xiao Kui died in a flash flood. She returned home as a cold corpse. Xiaolan watched Xiao Kui's body being cremated with her own eyes, and for the first time, she felt fear of death. She began to worry that her grandpa might also leave her one day. She would check her grandpa's breathing while he slept, and couldn't help but ask him if he was afraid of death. Her grandpa had no taboos about this. He told Xiaolan he was not afraid of death, because I can be with you while alive, and with your uncle and other when dead. Both sides are loved ones. Spring came and went. Autumn passed. In a season of continuous rain, the news of Commander Zhu's passing cast a shadow over the whole country. Her grandpa's entire spirit began to wither. Soon, the grandpa became physically weak and could no longer move freely. After examination, the doctor told Xiaolan that her grandpa was too old and all his organs were failing. Only his heart refused to give up. Xiaolan knew in her heart that her grandpa couldn't bear to leave her. The orchid he had cultivated for many years had died from her malted milk, and Commander Zhu had suddenly passed away, crushing the hope of Xiaolan's parents returning home. Under multiple blows, her grandpa could no longer hold on. He was too tired, but for Xiaolan, he was unwilling to let go just yet. After this, Xiaolan became the head of the house. She cared for her grandpa meticulously, just as he had cared for her in childhood, pouring hot water, squeezing toothpaste, toasting buns, warming the jacket. In childhood, the grandpa was Xiaolan's oiled paper umbrella against the wind and rain. Now, Xiaolan was her grandpa's walking stick. The two, one old and one young, suddenly swapped life roles. Fortunately, they had a group of warm-hearted neighbors. On New Year's Eve, when Xiaolan was chopping dumpling filling alone at home, the neighbors came over with food. The group gathered to make dumplings, sing, and chat. The quiet room became lively for a rare moment. During the fireworks, Xiaolan knelt to kowtow and wished her grandpa a Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Grandpa. Grandpa, be healthy all year. The two simple sentences were Xiaolan's most sincere blessing and her most powerless wish. Soon, her grandpa couldn't even walk anymore. Xiaolan had to read the newspaper to him to relieve his boredom. When her grandpa slept, she would wildly draw orchids on the wall. The green leaves covering the wall seemed to extend with life. She wished her grandpa could be like the leaves on the wall, forever youthful. But all of this was just a fantasy. The housework now fell on Xiaolan's shoulders. She was clumsy at first, but quickly became proficient, able to cook a good meal for her grandpa. Sometimes, when her grandpa was being difficult and refused to eat, Xiaolan would also raise the ruler as a threat. She would bathe her grandpa, just as he had bathed her in childhood, bathe him, and give him a bedtime massage. The cloth doll from her childhood that squeaked when squeezed was now held by her grandpa, becoming the only sound he could use to call her. Late one night, Xiaolan couldn't help but cry out loud. She was afraid that one day her grandpa would truly leave her. But her grandpa, just like years ago, made a monkey face for Xiaolan. The grandchild and grandpa smiled at each other. Their mutual devotion and care were expressed without words. One day, Xiaolan received a letter from her mother. She happily read the letter to her grandpa. Mother's problem is solved. She will be home soon. Xiaolan then compared this letter with the previous ones and found that the handwriting was different. It turned out that for the past decade, the letters her grandpa read to her were all written by him. Xiaolan stared at the grandpa's letter for a long time. Tears rolled down her face. In the past, which she thought was devoid of everything, her grandpa's silent love had always been there. In the sunlight, Xiaolan played different little animals on the horizontal bar her grandpa had set up for her, acting out different animals. She desperately tried to cheer her grandpa up, but her grandpa never woke up again. On the day of her grandpa's burial, the weather was miserable and rainy. Xiaolan stood alone before her grandpa's body, pinning her grandpa's medals one by one onto his chest. She continuously confessed her mistakes, that she didn't give the harmy melon to the coach, and that she had killed the orchid with water, because her grandpa had said that good people go to heaven after death, and bad people go underground. As long as you help others, and don't tell lies, you are a good person. She hoped her grandpa could forgive her, so she could reunite with him in heaven later. As it was getting dark, Xiaolan ran to the road to guide her grandpa's coffin. But the coffin arrived, and the driver didn't recognize her. Xiaolan and her grandpa's coffin passed by each other. She watched from afar in the wind and rain. At the time, she didn't know why she didn't chase after it to see her grandpa buried. It wasn't until she grew up that she understood that perhaps that was her grandpa's wish too. Because her grandpa was not buried, but went to heaven. They would see each other in heaven later. See You in Heaven is an autobiographical film written and directed by Jiang Wenli herself. There are not many conflicts or dramatic stories here, just an era, a rainy region, a small courtyard, a tiled house, and the calm, uneventful lives of the old man and the young girl within. Yet, there aren't many conflicts or stories here. An era, a rainy region, a small courtyard, a tiled house. The two, one old and one young, lived a calm and uneventful life. But what's wonderful is that it is not dull. In winter, when the browned buns are taken from the stove, and when the old man puts the warmed cotton jacket on his granddaughter, I believe many people's hearts are fiercely tugged. Also tugged at is the old man gently waving a fan on a summer night, and in the small courtyard with flowers and grass, the old man sitting on a chair, holding up a skipping rope for his granddaughter. This is a story of an era closely tied to life, and a nostalgic journey in memory of the deceased. Therefore, it doesn't need deliberate conflicts. The mutual care of the grandpa and granddaughter generates infinite beauty, and this beauty becomes extraordinarily touching because of the similar memories of many people. Who hasn't been wholeheartedly protected by an elder in their innocent childhood? Who, in a moment, years later, still, because of a dream, an image, or a movie, doesn't suddenly remember that elder who has long passed and is locked deep in their memory? So, See You in Heaven is not just Jiang Wenli's fervent expression of missing her grandpa. It is also our deep remembrance of a grandparent we may have all had. And fortunately, if your dear relative is still alive, then take the opportunity to call them more during the holidays and go home to visit more. Because once the opportunity is missed, there will never be a chance to make up for it. If you like this kind of content, want to know more Chinese life and show, please subscribe my channel. See you next time.